Realize that we all build on the foundation of the ones that have gone before us. Honor and respect those that have gone before you. It's appropriate to invite them back for special events like a 50th anniversary of the church or different celebrations like that. Don't speak negatively about your predecessor to other people in the church. And it's appropriate to keep your predecessor updated occasionally on events of the church and maybe people that they've been close to. So, ministerial courtesy. The General Council bylaws list a violation of ministerial courtesy as a reason for ministerial discipline and possible dismissal. And while not defined, it essentially means one minister interfering with the ministry of another minister or undermining the leadership of a pastor. And it involves several of the items that we've been discussing, and the severity of the offense will determine whether or not it rises to the level of a credential matter. But this issue of how we deal with other pastors and other ministers really is important. And we want to be able to strive for unity in working together. Okay, so here's some tips for ministerial success for dealing with your colleagues. First of all, build relationships. Don't be a loner. And this is especially important here in Alaska. It can be very isolating, especially if you're in a rural community, maybe a community that's off the road system. Maybe you're on an island down in southeast, or you're out in a bush community out in western Alaska. Even if you're on the road system. In Alaska, ministers can tend to feel a little bit isolated. So you need to be very proactive in building relationships with other pastors. I want to say this: don't wait for other pastors to come to you. You go to other people and you take the initiative and begin to build those relationships. Oftentimes, I'll hear people say, well, no one ever reached out to me. And while that may be true, I want to encourage you to be the one to reach out to other people, because that's something that you have control over. So build a relationship, maybe meet for coffee, or if you're isolated, if you're not able to drive somewhere, pick up the phone, just keep in touch with people, have maybe a weekly phone meeting, and really be intentional about building those relationships. Join the local ministerial association and participate in community projects as much as possible. I know when I was a youth pastor, as part of Sitka, as part of the ministerial association, one of my jobs was to help with the local high school baccalaureate. And there's different ways that you can get involved in the community in the local ministerial association. Don't allow yourself to criticize other ministers in private or public. Even avoid critical comments told in jest. Okay, that's really important. If you see a problem or have a problem with another minister, make sure that you exercise Matthew 18 principles and you go directly to him or her and address it. If approaching the other party does not achieve results, then seek the advice of your presbyter. When you're in conflict with others, pray for wisdom and guidance. So really the basic idea is to follow biblical principles. If you have a problem with a minister, go and talk with that minister about it. And if they aren't able to come into agreement with you, then you can go to the presbyter or other ministers and get them involved. But we want to deal with that kind of conflict in a biblical manner. Handle disagreements with respect, honesty, and a humble spirit. Don't compare your ministry to that of others. Remember that God calls you to do your work. This is so tempting, isn't it, for us to look at the work that someone else is doing and to compare ourselves and think, boy, I can't preach like that guy can. Or I can't teach like that guy can. Or I can't lead worship or teach youth, whatever the case may be. But God didn't call you to be like them. He called you to be like you. And if we can realize that, that will really cut down on the conflict and the jealousy that we would have. You are an individual with your own unique contribution that God has for you. If you're on staff, inform your senior pastor if you intend to seek a position at another church. Now, some people struggle with this because they think, well, I don't want my pastor to think less of me, or I don't want my pastor to fire me if they think I'm looking somewhere else. But if you have a healthy relationship with your pastor, you'll be able to talk with them about that. And your pastor will encourage you and really be a part of the process of helping determine if that's where the Lord would have you. So I encourage you, if you're serving on staff somewhere, if you're looking to leaving to allow your senior pastor to be a part of that process and have input. Avoid misrepresenting yourself or exaggerating accomplishments. When you leave your house in order. Set up your successor's success. I like that. When you leave, don't take parting shots at the church. Don't leave in a bad manner. But make sure you do everything you can to set up the person that will follow you and the people of God at that church for success. Because we're about building the kingdom, right? That's what we want to be about. If you're recruiting a staff pastor from another church, inform that senior pastor of your intentions. When stepping into a new pulpit, always show honor and respect to your predecessor. At every step of the transition process, hold no grudges or ill will. So here's another scenario for you to consider. You're a staff member and are becoming increasingly frustrated with your lead pastor. You don't agree with his vision. You feel devalued. The people in the congregation begin to speak negatively about your pastor. What should you do? You guys have any thoughts on that? If you're in that position, in this scenario, either here in class or if you're online, what would be your suggestions on how to handle this situation?
Probably go to the pastor yourself first before talking to anybody else.
Yeah, go to the pastor first. That's good.
Clear about what it is that's bothering you, so that you have like a concrete suggestion instead of just telling them, you really bother me, just something about you.
Right.
Something like that you can build them up with, and not just leave them feeling out of sorts.
Sure. That's good. What would you do about the people that are coming from the congregation to speak negatively about the pastor to you?
I remind them what it says in the Bible about gossiping and things like that.
Yeah.
Tell them if something's really bothering them, they should go to the pastor.
Yeah, that's good.
Because they're putting oil on you and you're squeaking.
Right. Right. So, in case you guys online couldn't hear it, you're saying that you'd remind them what the Bible says about gossip, and really, if they have an issue, they really need to go talk to the pastor. Anybody online have anything, Alan?
No. I was just checking. They are listening, but no.
Okay.
Nothing yet.
And if you come to a place where even after talking with your pastor, you still just cannot follow him or her, really what you need to do in that place is you need to resign and go somewhere else.
Okay, so Tim just reported, search out my own spiritual motivations. Often our dissatisfaction is more from own spiritual battles than the pastor's shortcomings.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. We often assume that it's the pastor's problem, but that's a good point, Tim. Oftentimes it can be our problem, and that's when if we work through this grid, that can help us to be able to clarify the situation and deal with those things. Well, I think the main thing is here, let's just handle all these relationships in a God-honoring fashion. Here's just one more scenario. You recently left a church to pastor a church in a different city. You've received reports from former congregants who are unhappy with the vision of the new pastor. Well, what should you do? Should you get on the phone and call up the new pastor and tell him that he's not doing it right? Or, he needs to get a different vision? Or, well, you guys probably know that's not what you should do, right? If you have former congregants calling you, I think the right thing to do there is to refer them to their pastor and just let them know you'll be praying. And just pray for the situation. Okay, just a few words about the minister's community. Some tips for ministerial success with that. Pray earnestly for your community and its leaders, even those with whom you philosophically and politically disagree. So the community you're in, pray for the leaders. Avoid becoming isolated. Arrange meetings with your local politicians. Attend city council meetings. Become visible to your political leaders. Take care of your reputation within the community. Those are after all, the people that you want to reach. Listen to concerns from the community, even if it comes from non-believers. Be sensitive to the community standards in place. Design ministries to benefit the entire community. Encourage members to become politically involved in the community by serving on boards, committees, other volunteer work. Engage in a positive public relations campaign that brings attention to your work and creates a good image. So just maintaining a visibility, really, of the church in the community. And you can become a member of local clubs like Rotary and different things like that. Then make sure that you play by the rules and obey the laws of the land. All right, the minister's fellowship and denomination. So when you become an Assemblies of God minister, you have commitments to the fellowship. You sign paperwork that you agree to adhere to and teach the 16 fundamental truths. And the ethical position really is to affirm the doctrine of your fellowship. If you can't resolve questions and doubts that you have regarding doctrinal differences, the ethical thing to do is to voluntarily withdraw your credential. One example of the doctrines of the church that I think there's a whole chapter in the textbook written about is the second coming of Christ and our ethical obligations there. It talks quite a bit about that. And the moral and ethical deterioration of our times is one of the more compelling reasons for the widespread expectation of the return of Christ. And the book says that ministers deal ethically with the expectation of the coming of the Lord in these 4 ways. First of all, we encourage those for whom the promise has lost its luster. Maybe people that aren't even really thinking about the fact that He's coming soon. We reassure those who have become discouraged because of unfulfilled spiritual yearnings. We rekindle the first love of the lethargic, those who have lost their passion for righteousness. And we preach, live, and act with the urgency that characterized the early church. The early church definitely had an urgency you can read about in the book of Acts and the epistles about the second return of Christ. So more commitments to the fellowship. Be familiar with the bylaws. Follow policies and share standards that you have adhered to. As mentioned before, this includes abstinence from alcohol, tobacco, and other recreational drugs. Pay all dues and network tithes faithfully as you agree to do. Support your fellow ministers and district and national leaders. Support missionaries. It's a vital part of being an Assembly of God church. It's very important. In fact, I think it's hard to be an Assembly of God church if you're not supporting missions in some way. Attend gatherings and events such as Network Conference or your regional meetings when possible. So, I just want to talk briefly about a restoration process. When a minister experiences a moral failure, he or she is subject to dismissal as a minister. There is a restoration process that's prescribed by the bylaws. Restoration is a privilege and not a right, so it's not a guaranteed option. And it's not available in all circumstances. It does require that the minister be contrite and have repentance. And although returning to ministry is usually the perceived highest priority to fallen ministers, really the most critical issue in their restoration is their return to spiritual wholeness.
Yeah.
So when a minister falls, like let's say example, they commit adultery, and they go through a restoration process. Right after they sin, oftentimes the minister's first thought is, I need to get back into the pastorate. Well, that's not really the first concern, is it? First concern is for them to be spiritually whole and for them to be restored to their family. That's really the major concern. And then, once those are addressed, then you look at getting them back into ministry. The restoration process includes being removed from the minister's current ministry position and being under the supervision of another minister, counseling, amongst other things. And the length of time varies. It can be around 2 years or so, depending on the violation. So some tips for ministerial success: communicate regularly with the network. Ask yourself, I like this, ask yourself how you can serve the network rather than what the network can do for you. Now, I'm not talking about like the network office, like helping our office, but helping others in the network. So other ministers, other churches. So as a group of a whole, don't come at it thinking, well, I wonder what everyone can do for me. Think about what you might have to be able to contribute. Maybe it's in leadership, or maybe serving at a youth camp, or maybe it's encouraging other ministers. We all have something that we can give. And so be thinking about how God could use you to help the network be better. Because the network is really all of us together. Avoid putting a material value on membership with the Alaska Ministry Network and the Assemblies of God. See it as your partner for success in your ministry. Pray for your denomination or fellowship and the authorities over you. Take the initiative to become a participant in regional and network-wide activities. Understand how our fellowship works.
You're welcome. All right.
Be aware of and sensitive to what God is doing through the denomination and how He's using it for His purposes. Make it a personal rule to not talk negatively about your authorities, the network, and the Assemblies of God. So really, as a pastor, we don't want people in our church speaking negatively about leaders. Questions?
No, just a comment.
Okay.
I was just sort of kind of just suddenly had a thought. I've been thinking a lot about sometimes on YouTube we'll see Catholic viewpoints and stuff like that saying, it's the one true church, we should all go back and all that. And I'm just wondering what we should do when we get a point of view like that. How do we want to tell them we're not for them, or we're not against them, we're for them, and we want to be, we're working together for the kingdom of God and not throwing stones because we have to be in a different denomination.
Right. So what do you do when someone of another fellowship thinks that you're being critical?
I was specifically thinking when I moved up here, I was in the church, I was talking to somebody who was in Pentecostal. And it was Pentecostal. I don't even know what Pentecostals was, but my concern was that they were Bible-based.
Oh, right.
And, I know that attitude exists. It's like, my house is better than your house.
Right.
And, it's a good way just to let them know we're all working for the same.
I think you just say that. You just, we focus on what we agree together, especially if they are a Bible-believing, Christ-honoring church, to focus on the things that we have in common.
I know we have it's sensitive to pick up a lot of noises, but they weren't able to hear his question or his feedback.
Okay.
If there's any way to summarize whatever was going on there.
Okay.
They were asking.
Okay. Yes. His question was, what do you do when there's someone from another fellowship, maybe another denomination, another church, that really kind of looks down on the church that you go to. How do you really have unity, and how do you work together with them? And so that was really the main question there. And I think we do just focus on the things that we have unity on together, and speak positively of other churches. It really doesn't help the cause of Christ if, as Pentecostals, we're speaking negatively about anybody, whether it's Baptists or Covenant or Lutheran or anything like that. Obviously, if it is a cult, we want to make sure that our members understand the differences and that type of thing. But for those that are the other ones, like I said, like Baptists or Lutherans or Covenant or other churches like that, we definitely can have fellowship with them and work together for the cause of Christ and the community.
Like I said, work together. So in my family, I'm the only Christian, except for my grandmother. My sister is a professed Buddhist, practicing Buddhism. And I took it upon myself to learn the apologetic side of, where Christianity, how would that fit? How would you communicate to the Buddhists? You got to learn a little bit about Buddhism and understand that.
Yeah.
Apologetics will teach you that. Or go sit in a one meeting and figure it out, right?
Right.
And so over the years, it's God putting the right words. I find that it's not like, I can read and study, but sometimes certainly come short and fall short of the right conversation. But the Lord has somehow put those moments that we can talk about common ground, and love has been that common ground, the conversation of love, the action of love. Yeah. How would you do that? And it sits well. And I noticed that when LDS come knocking my door, instead of shooting them off the porch or trying to show them, my Bible versus theirs, is find a compliment or something. Hey, I know you're out here hoping that people would know our Lord Jesus Christ. And I would say thanks to I understand also that you're being out here today seeking ways to help others or in their community. I think I commend that. So I try to find some positives, and that opens the door for more conversation. Yeah. So we're talking. I realize not everything comes even close to following what we believe, but there's a door.
Right.
Versus back in the day, you're like, all right, I got to be so well versed to combat and show them where they're wrong. It's not how God has led me in any of these conversations.
Right, and that often doesn't work either.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're right. Well, you're wrong. I'm wrong. Okay. Whatever.
Right. That's good.
Fighting with the car, baby.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions or thoughts about getting along with our colleagues or ethics with congregations before we move on? This is really important material for us to get, because oftentimes there are disagreements with ministers, and we step on each other's toes. And if we follow these ethical principles we've been looking at, that will really help us to be able to have unity in the faith. All right, well, we'll move on to some of the minister and contemporary ethical issues. And we're not going to take time to do a deep dive into too many of these items, but we want to talk about some of them. First of all, there's abortion. And the arguments, of course, against abortion are many. First of all, God is the giver of all life. And we know the Bible talks about the capability to bear children is a gift. And that humans were created in the image of God. Remember, male and female, He created them, were made in the image of God. We know that life begins at conception. We know that the unborn are innocent. This is not a good birth control method. Abortion is cruel to the aborted, and it also harms the woman. So these are all the arguments against abortion. And further, there's a good movie out called Unplanned. I don't know if you guys have heard of it or not, but
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it.
It's a good movie dealing with the issue of abortion. And abortion is a very important topic. Of course, in 1973, there was Roe versus Wade when it became legal. That was actually the year I was born. And so I believe that we should continue to pray about this issue. We should continue to consider this issue when we're voting, and just do everything that our conscience leads us to do to come against abortion, because it is murder and it is wrong. And so there's some biblical material we'll take a look at here briefly. Probably won't look at all of these, but they're there for your reference. Genesis 1, 26 to 28. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all earth, over every creepy thing that creeps in the earth." So that's the one, of course, that discusses how we're all made in God's image. So those babies that are being aborted, they're made in God's image. And I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to go through and read all these scriptures, but they're there for your reference. And the solution to the spiritual problem behind abortion is for the church to assume responsibility for the spiritual decline in America that has led to this tragic situation. And then a couple other terms. Voluntary euthanasia is when that's what the patient wishes to do. Non-voluntary would be the patient is unable to express their wishes. Oftentimes, the patient, of course, is unconscious. Involuntary euthanasia is against the patient's wishes. And physician-assisted suicide is when medical personnel provide the patient with the means to end their life, knowing that is their intent. So those are some terms around euthanasia. Arguments against active, so we're talking about arguments against active euthanasia, which is where we're actually taking means to kill someone. As first of all, there's improved pain control now. So people that are still alive, you can give them medicine to help control their pain. Next, if you actually give someone drugs to kill themselves or to kill them, you may be sending an unbeliever to their eternal destiny. Next, God is the giver of life. So we believe that when it's time for someone to go, that it should be God that takes them, that we should not be actively involved in that. We believe in divine healing. I mean, if we do believe in divine healing, which we do, we want to continue to believe that God can bring healing to that person, even up till the very end. And by taking measures to hasten their death, that's actually opposed to the idea of divine healing. Also, suffering too is part of God's plan. It's part of life that we live is suffering. There's always a hope for new cures, and obviously the wrongness of killing. Yes.
Good question here from Levi. The state of Alaska has joined other states that have legalized marijuana, which is considered the same as taking an aspirin or something to that effect. What is our approach as the Assemblies of God on the topic of medical marijuana?
Medical marijuana?
Medical marijuana, yeah. Not necessarily recreational, but in this state it doesn't matter because it's recreational or right. I do know that medical marijuana is regulated in the sense of strength and whatnot and sold in those perspective versus you can down here buy weak or strong or whatever.
Right.
It doesn't matter a whole lot in the state of Alaska, but some states are only medical marijuana.
Right. Well, that's a good question, Levi. For recreational marijuana, our position is very clear. It would be put in the same category as alcohol and tobacco, and then recreational drugs is how it's put. And ministers are prohibited from doing that. I don't know offhand that we have any specifics that would deal with medical marijuana. I would just, without being an expert in that arena, I think I would caution against using it. Would be my position that you would want to just be careful about addictions that could be led to that type of thing.
I know that is usually certainly a policy that most churches adopt for their leadership, but what if you had a volunteer that uses it? They're not on staff, they're not ministers, but they are qualified to work. What's the position there? Is that up to each church? Is that Is there something that?
Yeah. Well, so in general, so let's say, can they can hear you, right?
Yes, they can hear.
If we're dealing with alcohol or recreational or something like that, really, how every church for ministers with the Assemblies of God, it's all prohibited. You can't do it. You get disciplined or dismissed for that. Right. How every church handles that with their membership, each church seems to handle that a little bit differently. Some churches would say you cannot be a member if you engage in any of those activities. Some would say, well, you can't be involved in any kind of leadership if you engage in those kinds of activities. For me, if I was pastoring, I would not want any of my board members or pastoral team members, really any of my volunteers at that level, to be engaging in that. That's more on the recreational side. On the medical side, I'd have to do some more research on that, just to be honest with you. I haven't had to deal with that personally with someone yet. Sure. Levi, what do you think? I think that my default, honestly, would be to not want to do that. I think that normally there's other drugs that could be given, and I just really hesitate to support the marijuana industry.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen anything yet. You may be thinking.
You might have a delay too.
Well, probably not in the typing. Just on that. We'll see. Why is this called? I would strongly not recommend it from the hallucinogenic standpoint to the witness damaging.
Yeah.
This was his comment.
Yeah, I agree with that. It does seem like it would be harmful to your witness.
Yeah. I mean, if it's to take away or remove, but for instance, any legal over-the-counter even can obscure your thought.
Right.
NyQuil certainly can do that. It's treating a symptom and not the issue.
Yeah.
I have over-the-counters at home. I do have prescriptions, but nothing that would hallucinate or obscure my thought. They have potential, I suppose, too.
Right.
So, but anyway, so it really falls in those lines. I mean, we have medical marijuana still probably viewed as a substance not readily available in the sense of illegal. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like there's drugs like morphine, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That obscures your thought, but
sure.
But there's just something that goes along with marijuana that I'm just not comfortable with.
Yeah, and Tim puts it kind of the same way. He says, "I don't see where the medical industry at large has adopted marijuana as a proven medical treatment better than any other approved options." Right? Exactly. I mean, you can even have homeopathic things that, depending what part of the nation you're from, could have similar effects to, look at CBD. It is, it's not the same as marijuana, but has similar properties.
Yeah.
Designed to reduce joint issues, or it can be used for seizures, can be used for a lot of various things, and could also perhaps cloud the mind. I don't know. Not enough has been done to research that. So
yeah, I agree with you guys. Okay, so there's some biblical material, of course, about euthanasia, the concept of death. There's some scriptures there. Suicide in the Bible. There's the prohibition of murder. There's the sacredness of life. that life is held in trusteeship, and that God determines the time of death. So, of course, this was really popularized by the guy from Oregon, Dr. Jack Kevorkian, with the physician-assisted suicides. It's good to be aware of these types of things. All right, marriage and sex. The biblical order of marriage and sex is found in Genesis 2:24. And it says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife,